Very good morning to you. My name is David Batsoffen, and this is Off the Shelf. And today I'm joined by Justin Fox, who's the author of this wonderful novel, The Wolf Hunt. Justin, good morning. Welcome to you.
Good morning, David. Good to be with you.
It's always a pleasure chatting to you. Looking through your biog, you have more than 20 books to your name. Do you sort of wake up every morning and go, what should I write today?
David, I suppose it's my training as a journalist. I was at Getaway magazine for years, and the habit of writing every day and of chopping and changing topics, it comes
Yeah.
very naturally to me. So I'm very comfortable moving between poetry and fiction and nonfiction and photographic books and children's books. So yeah, I suppose I'm a bit of a magpie. I keep picking interesting ideas and then running with them for a while and then dropping them and then starting a new set of ideas.
I must say that the Wolf Hunt reminded me in my youth, there used to be those small, I want to call them graphic novels, but I don't think they were, of British forces in Europe and those type of things. So it was a picture book, drawn
Yeah.
rather than photographic book. And this reminded me of those. In the
Yeah.
storyline, in the way the story is written, in the way the characters make you feel.
Yes, David, you're absolutely right. I also, as a teenager and as a child, read those kind of comic graphic no books
Mm,
about the Second World War. They were very, very popular when I was at Saks in the 1970s in junior school. And yes, I am harking back to a certain extent to some of those novels I read as a child. So there is nostalgia, and there is a little bit of paying homage to those kind of books. But also, I
mm.
try to bring some new stuff to the genre and played with some ideas. And if you look at the cover of this book, it is very much reminiscent of those books we would have read in the 1970s. It's a designer called Stephen Simons, who's a wonderful poet in his own right, and he and I thought about trying to recreate the
Yeah,
look, style, and mood of those 1970s graphic novels, and also the movies we watched when we were a kid, like Guns of Navarone and A
yeah.
Bridge Too Far and The Cruel Sea. The posters for those movies would have looked a little bit like the cover of this book. So there's definitely paying homage to our childhood in a sense here.
Because when I received review copies of your book from Jonathan Ball, your publishers, and I thought, why have they sent me secondhand books? And then I realized it was actually in the design. But you caught me for a split second, and I think that's
Yeah.
what you're trying to establish. So before the reader even reads page one, your mindset is already in the story or the type of story that you might be going to immerse yourself in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is both a decision between, well, partially me, but the author has very little deciding power between the graphic designer and the publishing house to go with something. It's very brave to go with a book that already looks like a battered second-hand copy instead of a brand new book. So it's a brave move, but it's an interesting. I think it's quite playful and fun.
Um, how much research, Justin, did you do for this particular for the wolf hunt, or did you just sort of think, I don't really? It can be sort of historical, but let's weave a bit of a fantasy story in amongst this, so that if people say, "Oh, but you know, the date wasn't the 5th of November; it was actually the 7th when this happened," you can go, "Yeah, but if you read the book, you'll realize that it's not all linear historical fact after fact after fact."
Yeah, David, I'm a complete research nerd. So before I wrote the first of these Second World War novels, I spent 4 years in archives before I wrote even the first word. So I spent a lot of time in London, where I was in the Imperial War Museum, which has meticulously recorded stuff, letters and logbooks and the like, the British Museum. The British National Archives in London were absolutely superb. All the South African logbooks from the Second World War are there. And then in Simonstown, the Simonstown Museum and the Simonstown Naval Museum have incredible archives. And so Before the first book, I spent 4 years doing that, and before this Wolf Hunt, I spent about 6 months in the archives. So I stick very, very, very close to the
Okay.
facts. As a travel writer and a journalist, I'm much more comfortable in the realm of nonfiction.
Mhm.
So I like to bed my narratives and my nonfiction in fact. And so a lot of almost every scene in Wolf Hunt, bar maybe one or two, are based on things that did happen in South African waters in 1941 and 42, and some of the scenes where the Germans come into Table Bay and they bring their submarine and they surface between Sea Point and Robben Island at night, and they let their crew up onto the deck to see the bright lights of the city. That's from a personal account of a U-boat captain that did exactly that. So it's very close to the truth.
I knew nothing of this. I must tell you, I went into your novel blind, so to speak. And
Yeah.
when I found out that there'd been U-boats in Table Bay, I go, what? I knew the three ships from Holland came in 1652 into Table Bay, but little did I know how much of this knowledge is actually out there. I mean, are there people who I don't want to say specialize in this type of book, but that will lap these sort of novels up because it's still of interest and maybe even relevant today?
Yeah, David, very few people know these stories. It's kind of naval historians, people in the Navy in Simonstown that have know about what the Navy was up to in the 1940s, and beyond that, it's a history that has been completely suppressed for all sorts of reasons. We could go into that. The National Party in the 1940s, after apartheid, didn't want to celebrate South Africa's success against the Germans and success in operating with the Royal Navy. So there
Mhm.
was a real suppression of this history. But yeah, it's wonderful to find a piece of exciting, riveting Second World War history that hasn't been worked through the mill of all the famous movies. And the Second World War is a patch that has been well trodden by
Yeah.
makers, writers for the last 80 years. So
Mm.
to come with a new patch of history that people don't know about it is very exciting for me, and I'm hoping for readers to discover that South Africa was in the thick of things, within sight of Durban and Cape Town, and ships were being sunk in our waters, close in. I think it's fascinating stuff.
It is, as I say, I knew nothing of this before I read the book, and now all of a sudden I need more of these. I want to find out more about Jack Pembroke and where the next journey takes him. And speaking of Jack, how do authors, specifically of books like this that are, as we've now discovered, historically correct, how do you come up with names? Because you don't want to tread on toes. There must be Pembrokes out there who'll see this book and go, no, hang on a second. Our Uncle Jack never did things like that.
Yeah, yeah. David, yeah, it's a tricky one because you have to have a lot of characters. I've got 25 characters on my ship, and then I have 50 characters on my U-boat, so there's a lot of names that I have to come up with. But the really important ones I think about for a long time. So let's take Jack Pembroke, my
Mm.
hero. Um, Jack is a very traditional name in the Royal Navy. In fact, a Jack tar is a sailor
Yeah.
in the Royal Navy. So the name Jack comes up again and again. And the most famous, perhaps the most famous of the naval war novels, are the Patrick O'Brian series, the Master and Commander series of novels
Mm.
set during the Napoleonic Wars. And his hero is Jack. So I'm sort of paying homage to a famous Jack in the Royal Navy through the word Jack, and it's a good name for a Navy hero. Pembroke is a very particular um, name that I'm using because I want him to have Welsh ancestry, and
Okay.
and he's been and he's been to Oxford, and he's from a sort of a noble family, and so Oxford has a college called Pembroke, and Pembrokeshire is part of the coast along the coast of Wales, and I have in the back of my head the idea of doing prequels to this
Mm.
and looking at Jack's great 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 grandfather in the Napoleonic Wars, and at that point Pembroke will be explained if
Ah,
I ever get
okay.
to those novels. So it's there in the back of my head, So that's a very particular name, and then
Mm.
all the other names have some ideas around them in the main protagonists. For instance, the captain of the U-boat is Brand, Brand, and he is a real firebrand. So there's often a meaning or a loosely applied meaning
Mm.
to the name.
When you talk about Pembroke, have you, at Oxford, how much of Justin Fox is in Jack Pembroke? Knowingly
Yeah,
or unknowingly?
yeah, knowingly a little bit, and unknowingly probably quite a lot. I have a whole mashup of ideas of who he is, and they're all sorts of characters that have touched me in my life. So a little bit of my father, and a little bit of my best friend, a little bit of me. I I think of his look as being a sort of a Colin Firth, a handsome British, dark,
Mm.
square-jawed, upstanding, righteous, being put in conditions of adversity. Yeah, so he's a mixed bag. But yes, of course, there's some of me, and I spent time in the Navy. I did my national service in Simonstown,
Okay.
so I had 2 years and that's exactly what's happened to Jack. He's come straight out of university, educated chap,
Mm.
and been thrown into the Second World War commanding a ship. So as a young man in the Navy, as is something that I do hark back to in my own life.
Yeah, because I suppose we all, in one way or another, of our age, went through national service in one of the armed forces. Sometimes
Yeah.
it became useful in later life, like with the wolf hunt. I was in technical services. I've never repaired another car, but that's neither here nor there. You've got a lot of characters. Do you storyboard your books before you start? And then do you allow the characters to lead the story, or are you very controlling?
David, I'm very, very controlling, and I plot and structure everything. I'm not like those brilliant novelists who let the characters dictate and wake up in the morning and wonder what is going to happen. That's not me. I'm not that guy. I'm the nerd who plots for a month beforehand every single scene for the whole novel, heavily structured, and when I wake up in the morning, I more or less know exactly from A to B what I want the character to do and what must happen in the chapter. And that's partly because I'm that kind of guy, a non-fiction writer who comes out of journalism, so I like a structure. And it's partly because these novels are complicated. So
Yeah.
sometimes I might have 20 or 30 ships operating against 20 or 30 ships, or a dozen submarines, or in later novels, 100 or 200 aircraft. And so I've got maps on my desk where I'm sitting right now
Mm.
with diagrams of where every ship is in the convoy and which ones have been sunk and which ones are about to be attacked because it's quite a complicated mess that I need to keep it in my head exactly who's where and who's dead because I don't want them to resurrect themselves in a later chapter. And hence I need this rigid structure just for my own sanity, I
Yeah.
suppose.
Have you then got great friends or colleagues who copy read your book so that exactly that doesn't happen? You know, Bob gets killed on page 3, and then on page 256, all of a sudden Bob's back and he's working in a shop.
You're absolutely right, David. I do have people who read, and I have a wonderful Admiral Soderland in Simonstown, who checks all my naval facts because you don't
Right.
want to make
No,
issues
you don't
in
want to
these
mess with
books.
the Navy. You can get a knock on your
They
door with guys with
yeah.
white armbands coming to say, the Admiral would like to speak to you.
Yeah, no, it's worse than that, David. You get on in Amazon, you get the comment section, and they take you apart if you make a
Really?
mistake. Long, detailed descriptions, and they tell you to do better next time, and you just say yes, sir, I will.
I was saying to somebody the other day, our generation, or the 21st century, let's say it that way, is the most connected, disconnected generation in history because of this exact thing. You've written your book, you're very happy with it. The Admiral's very happy with it. You put it on Amazon, and somebody in Boston
Yeah,
comes back at you and goes, no, on page 56, you said that never happened. And
yeah,
you go, oh, bloody
yeah.
hell.
Yeah, his name is Brad, and he's in Florida, and he's an ex-military man, and he will hunt me down when I make a mistake about a German mine of 1941 that
Really?
entangles space in a way that wasn't correct for that year. Yeah, no, he'll come for me.
It's like people who watch movies and then you go and read the reviews and they go, you couldn't have used the 63 Dodge because when this movie was set, it was 1962 and that vehicle
Yeah,
hadn't come out yet, or the parking meter was the wrong parking meter in the, in the shopping mall car park type of thing. And you go, oh,
yeah,
peace, people. I couldn't be
yeah,
bothered at the end of the day.
yeah,
Now we've spoken around the process of how you write and how you structure. So for people who are watching this, first time readers, or people who have seen this and go, I wonder if it's worth picking this book up. Give us the elevator pitch for the
yeah.
book.
Okay, so Jack Pembroke is a young British officer who's traumatized at Dunkirk. His ship is sunk, and he is suffering from injuries and post-traumatic stress. And he decides to come to the Cape, where his father is an admiral, and he thinks it'll be a cushy post. And he's put in charge of a small anti-submarine flotilla to escort ships up and down the South African coast, but unfortunately, it's not a cushy job. The Germans are sending U-boat packs to the Cape, 4 or 5 U-boats at a time, to sink all the ships surrounding the Cape
Mm.
because the Mediterranean is closed, and the only way the Eighth Army can be supplied in Egypt is by the convoys coming from Britain and America around the Cape, creating a bottleneck around Cape Town. And so Jack is thrust into the thick of it, off the Cape, fighting against German U-boats that are sinking ships. Also, one of the ships lands a spy on the coast, on the west coast, an Afrikaner who sympathizes with Hitler, and he is bent on a sabotage and assassination campaign at the Cape. And so that is the subplot: the Nazi spy and the German U-boats off the Cape.
Are there places in the Western Cape today that whose names can be traced back to those German U-boats, or maybe even to the spy? Because I know Robbie Leibrand was in the thick of things at that time, but he was well known, and spies don't want to be well known. They want to just skulk
Yeah,
about in the darkness of the pages and just be there or thereabouts without revealing themselves.
yeah. I only know of spies being landed on the South African coast. I only know of Robbie Leibrand, and that was up the west coast and almost in the Namaqualand area,
Mm,
and he infiltrated there. And so my spy in this novel is very much modeled on Robbie Leibrand,
yeah.
although there were plenty of spies,
Mm,
German spies operating all out over South Africa, and they were sending their intelligence largely to Lorenzo Marx, to what is Maputo today,
okay.
to the German embassy there would then transfer it to back to Berlin. In some cases, they did try and transmit from South Africa, but it was safer to send the messages via LM, Lorenzo
Right.
Marx. So my spy is based on Roby Lobran. Although the German U-boats came in close, and they were all over the South African coast, and there are hundreds of stories of even from within my family of U-boats being spotted, and sailors coming ashore and so on. But most of those are apocryphal. There's not much evidence. There's only one piece of evidence that they ever did come ashore. But the stories are fantastic, and that's what I'm interested in is the stories.
What was that movie from back in the 60s or 70s? The Russians Are Coming, where a Russian submarine was supposedly landed in America, and they
Yes,
came on onto the shores, and the
yes.
Americans were terrified, and chaos ensued. With a book like this, how do you before you put pen to paper, you said that you take a lot of time to structure, to storyboard, to know where everything is going. Are you then a consistent writer? Do you wake up in the morning and go, right, it's now 5 o'clock, I'm going to write until 7, and then that's my day done? Or do you set yourself a word target per day? How does your
Yeah.
process work?
Yeah, when I start writing, as I say, there's months and months of research where there's no writing at all. That's just
Right.
ferreting in articles and reading. When I start on day one, I write every single day, 7 days a week, and I start at about 9 in the morning, and
Mm.
I write about 12, and I have to get 1,000 words a day. That's the target.
You're right.
If I still have the energy and I can keep going after lunch, I will. But until I've hit the target of 1,000, I'm not allowed to leave this desk where I'm sitting. Um, and if I can keep that up, I will have a manuscript of some form in about 3 months. 90,000 words,
Yeah.
90 days, 1,000 words a day. It never quite works out that way, but that's the target. And I try as best I can to stick to it.
Do you see your words as not as children? So, in other words, when somebody says to you, "This sentence that you've used 19 words, you could actually get away with 4," and you go, "No, but these are my words. I want to use them all. I put them down on a piece of paper, make space for them." Or do your editors go, "No, you've handed us 100,000 words, cut 10,000."
Yeah, that does happen. I wrote a book a few years ago at 165,000, and
Wow.
they said cut 55,000. We won't publish more than 110. So I went away for 6 months and cut 55,000 words. It's one of the most painful things I've ever done. And
Mm.
as a consequence, I know that publishers like a novel at 90,000. And so these days I write them to 90,000 so that I never have to go through the
80,
pain of that again. Yeah.
89,999. Read
Yeah.
every word, count every one, see if I care. But I
Yeah.
mean, if you cut 55,000 words from a story, that's a whole nother book virtually. You've only
Yeah.
got to add another 40,000 to that, and you've got a second book already, Justin.
Yeah, I know, but unfortunately it's a little bit from here and there, so
Yeah.
you put it all together and it makes no sense. Yeah. Yeah.
But
No, it
that
is.
might,
So as a journalist, I'm nowadays very conscious. As a journalist, you're always given a word count. 1,200
yeah.
words do not go a word over. So now I'm very conscious of that, and I write to my own internal word count, and
Mm.
and sometimes it's a bit more and a bit less. And what tends to happen is if I keep a word count in mind, it's never going to be exact, but the book almost writes itself to the length that it wants
Yeah.
to go. Um, so, for instance, the Cape Raider, which is the previous novel of these Second World War novels, it needed to be longer. It just felt like it wanted to go a bit longer. Then the Wolf Hunt needed to be about 85, which is what this is. And the next one just naturally came in a bit shorter. And that might be because me and my readers have kind of got comfortable with the characters, and I probably maybe need to say a little bit less and
Yeah.
do a little bit less explaining because it's now coming easier and more
Yeah.
more obvious.
With books like this, because people are still interested in this history, and there are less and less people alive today that fought in those wars. The Second World War was 80 odd years ago, and those people were 18, 19. So they're 99, 100, 102, somewhere around there. So they're not going to be with us forever. When you start a book like this, is there a movie or a Netflix series now in the back of your mind so that you could say, I can take this book, I can give it to Netflix, and they can go, yep, this is virtually a script. Let's take it from here.
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, I do write very cinematically. It's just the way I write is.
Yeah.
I went to film school when I was younger, and I think visually, and I love Second World War movies, and I love movies. So the books write themselves very visually.
You're right.
And yes, this series has been optioned, and yes, Netflix is possibly interested, and yes, there is a possibility of it being shot. So
Well, that's
with the,
wonderful.
with the movie industry, you're always cautious because there's
Yeah.
always a lot of talk, but there is talk, and so it's possible.
Who would you like to see play Jack Pembroke if this was turned into a Netflix series?
David, I have absolutely idea. As I would like Colin Firth at age 24. That's what I want.
Fair enough.
And if I if I can't have that, then I don't know. I know that the producers are wanting a young
Yeah.
British actor. He has to be British and he has to be sort of slightly posh. And
Okay.
so it would be a 24, 25-year-old young posh British actor, and I don't really know who they are. Uh,
Fair enough.
so we'll see.
How, as a writer, Justin, how do you know when to write the end? We've gone through the word count. You've told us your process, but surely, like PTSD, when you've written the end, sent it off to the publishers, there must be a moment of hesitation going, I don't want to let this go. Can't I just write another page or something like that? Or are you as ruthless with that as you are when you go about your planning? You know what you want to do, you know what you want to say, and the end comes easy to you.
There are two answers to that. The one is I am absolutely ruthless, and because I've planned and plotted, the story has a natural end. Having said that, the endings are almost the hardest things to. I find it almost the hardest thing to write.
Mm.
I rewrite my endings again and again, and I never feel that I always doubt whether I've ended it correctly. And these are quite interesting because you're trying to set it up so that there's a possibility of a sequel or another novel
Yeah.
or another and another. So you have to end it in such a way that it feels like a complete story, that the reader is satisfied that they've read a beginning, a middle, and an end, and yet you
Right.
have to leave a little bit open. And so each of the endings I've done slightly differently, and I'm not sure which one is the best or the correct way to go. But let's just say endings are struggles, and I'm still struggling with endings. But I hope that the reader feels a certain satisfaction at the end of each,
Mm.
with a little bit of hunger to find out what will happen in the future to Jack.
You don't put sort of at the lower right-hand corner in tiny font TBC and see how many people actually pick that up, to be continued.
No, I think it's implicit in the last paragraph or two that there's
Yeah,
a dip with a possibility of it lifting again.
yeah. The book is The Wolf Hunt. It's published by Jonathan Ball. It's written by Justin Fox. I suppose in olden day terms, it is what would be called a ripping read. What I suggest you do is you take it on holiday with you, or do as I do, go and lie in a bath and just immerse, pun intended, yourself in the book, in the characters, and everything that happens between the covers. Justin, I had a lot of fun reading this. I had a lot of fun chatting to you, and I cannot wait to talk to you about your next novel. So thank you for being off the shelf with me, and it's been great to catch up with you once again.
Thank you so much, Dave. It's been good to be with you.